So please welcome in his first TV appearance since the arrest, Professor Henry Louis Gates joining us.
Thank you.
Tom and Professor Gates, nice to have you both.
Thanks, Sylvain.
You sort of had your own moment of truth over recent days, so I'd like to start with that. We know that you were on a lengthy trip to China and you were returning home. What exactly happened?
Well, I was filming my new documentary series for PBS. It's called Faces of America. It's about immigration. And we were filming Yo-Yo Ma's ancestral cemetery for a week in China. It was fantastic. And my daughter and I took my daughter along, and we had just flown back from China. I came from New York to Boston, and my driver picked me up. We got to my house in Harvard Square, and the door was jammed. The door wouldn't open. And to make a long story short, I asked my driver just sort of to push the door through. I gave him his tip. He left. I called Harvard Real Estate, which does the maintenance on my house because they own the house. And while I was on the phone, a Cambridge policeman showed up on my porch. I walked with the phone still active to my porch, and he demanded that I step out of my house onto the porch. That's all he said. He said, "I would like you to step outside." I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "Why are you here?" He said, "I'm investing a breaking and entering charge." I said, "This is my house. I'm a Harvard professor. I live here." He said, "Can you prove it?" I said, "Just a minute." I turned my back. I walked into the kitchen to get my Harvard ID and my Massachusetts driver's license. He followed me without my permission. I gave him the two IDs, and I demanded to know his name and his badge number.
And when you demanded that, what did he say?
He wouldn't say anything. He was just very upset. He was trying to figure out who I was. He was looking at the ID. He didn't say anything. And I said, "Why are you not responding to me? Are you not responding to me because you're a white police officer and I'm a black man?" He turned, walked out, turned his back on me, walked out. I followed him onto my porch. It looked like a police convention. There were so many policemen outside. I stepped out on my porch and said, "I want to know your colleague's name and his badge number." And this officer said, "Thank you for accommodating my earlier request. You are under arrest." And he slapped handcuffs on me, and they took me to jail.
Originally, they put the handcuffs behind your back.
They put the handcuffs behind my back, and I told them that I was handicapped. I used a cane. They had a debate. There was a black officer there who was very sensitive. He persuaded them to move the handcuffs from around the back to the front. They took me to the Cambridge police station and booked me. Fingerprints, mugshot, which has now been all over the universe.
You've seen it a lot. I got to tell you, to see, I mean, Professor Gates, I had him in college, and you know, to have that shot, your mug shot, is quite a shock to see. What was that moment like for you?
It was terrifying, and I realized.
Were you afraid?
I knew that I was in danger, but I knew too that as soon as my friends could get to jail, starting with Professor Charles Ogletree, who was my friend and lawyer, that eventually I would be okay. But what it made me realize was how vulnerable all black men are. How vulnerable all people of color are, and all poor people, to capricious forces like a rogue policeman. And this man clearly was a rogue policeman.
The police report said he described you as behaving in a tumultuous manner.
Yeah, look how tumultuous I am. I'm 5'7", I weigh 150 pounds, and my tumultuous, outrageous action, Tom, was to demand that he give me his name and his badge number. Soledad, why? Because if I had stepped out on the porch, and it's important for all people to know this about the police, if I had stepped outside of my house, he couldn't come in my house legally without a warrant. He couldn't arrest me without a warrant. Had I stepped outside, he would have slapped handcuffs on me for being under suspicion of breaking and entering, because he was responding to a profile. Two black men with backpacks were breaking and entering into my home, and when he saw me, he just presumed that one of them was me.
A neighbor called 911. I mean, it was a neighbor of yours who said that description, two black men breaking into your house. Yeah, Are you angry with your neighbor?
No, in fact, I hope right now that if someone's breaking my house, this nice lady is calling the police. I have a lot of valuable art and books in that house. And in fact, I think I'm going to send this person flowers. I hope she's watching. I know that she must be intimidated, and she must think that I'm very angry. It wasn't her fault. It was the fault of a policeman who couldn't stand a black man standing up for his rights right in his face. And that's what I did. And I would do the same thing exactly again.
The charges were dropped.
The charges were dropped, and the mayor of Cambridge, God bless her, called me and apologized to me. And my lawyers and I are considering what further action, because...
What does that mean? Does that mean lawsuit?
Perhaps, because this is not about me. This is about the vulnerability of black men in America.
You know, you raised an interesting point. And again, the reason you were originally here was to talk about being the inspiration for Tom Joyner. You helped Tom Joyner track down part of his history. That brings us right back to the vulnerability of African-American men, but many, many years prior to your situation.
Almost a century ago, Tom's great uncles, Tom and Meeks Griffin, were electrocuted on September 29th, 1915, in South Carolina for a crime for murdering a white man, a Confederate veteran, for a crime that they most certainly did not commit. And we are filing papers to the governor of South Carolina, who's been rather busy lately. He hadn't responded to our
we heard about him in the news, too.
I think he took your petition to South America somewhere. But we're going to get them exonerated. It's a terrible, terrible story.
What did it feel like? I mean, all this was done with the DNA testing, and really your passion has been to sort of fill in the blanks of the story of African Americans. You do that on PBS, you do that in your work, you do that in your research, you do that in the DNA testing. Yeah. It was incredibly emotional for you to know the people you came from.
Yeah.
Why?
First of all, when you asked me to do this, and you asked, name someone who's been very influential in your life. This was 3 weeks ago, not knowing that what happened to Dr. Gates would have happened and making him the star of this whole Black America 2 show today. Every day that I go into my studio, I have the books that he gave me about my ancestry.
Tracing your history.
And like the log at the Apollo, just for good luck, when I walk into my studio, I rub these books because that makes me realize that no matter how much of a struggle that I might be going through, that my ancestors went through a larger struggle, and that we have come, and we've come a long way. And Dr. Gates and the incident reminds us that we still have a long way to go.
Why is it so important that black people know where they come from? I mean, a lot of your passion, Professor
Right.
Gates, is in making that connection. And when people discover who they come from, they break down.
You get fired up. You get fired up. I know it did for me.
What did it do for you?
It did for me. When he showed me where I came from and the people that came before me, the shoulders that I stand on, my ancestry, it was inspirational to me. Now, all of you out there, in this audience, out there in the audience, the TV audience, I strongly recommend that you do the very same thing. And no matter how tough things seem to be, if you can look back and see what your ancestors went through and where you came from, you will be much better as a person. And you will say, you know.
Why does it change people, Professor Gates? Why do they have this visceral, emotional reaction to knowing about something that happened many decades prior?
Because our ancestors' identity was systematically robbed from us. The identity of our ancestors, our collective history, and our individual history. And when I'm using a team of genealogists out of Utah, thank God for the Mormons who've done all this, gathered all these records, when we give people their family tree back, they all cry. Whether it was Oprah Winfrey, whether it was Chris Tucker, Chris Rock, Tom Joyner, they all cried because the lost have been found. It's like thinking heretofore that you were floating on air without any roots. Zora Hearst said we were people, we were branches without roots. But we are branches based on roots. And each of us has to do our own family tree. Each of us has to restore the lost ancestors back to slavery. And collectively, we can tell a new tale of the history of the African-American people as a group, as a community.
You have offered to fill in some of the blanks for that police officer who helped himself into your house and arrested you. And you've said you want an apology. Have you had an apology yet?
I haven't heard from Sergeant Crowley. I would be prepared to listen to him if I were convinced that if he would tell the truth about what he did, about the distortions that he fabricated in the police report, I would be prepared as a human being to forgive him. That would not deter me from using this as an educational opportunity for America. Because if this can happen to me in Harvard Square, this can happen to anybody in the United States, and I'm determined that it never happened to anybody again.
Gentlemen, I thank you both. We're going to have you both stick around as we continue our conversation. We're waiting, of course, for President Obama's news conference and the premiere of Black in America 2. We're going to be joined in just a moment by talk radio host Steve Harvey and the man who brought him to a moment of truth, walking the walk of faith. That's straight ahead. Short break. Thanks, guys.